He was born in the slums, slept on a broken floor, failed more times than he could count. But one brutal night, something inside him snapped, and he made a decision that changed everything. This is not just a story about money. It's a story about mindset, pain, belief, and a war that most people never even realize they're fighting. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just flip your entire world upside down. The air was heavy, not just with humidity, but with something deeper, a weight, a truth waiting to be uncovered. He stepped into the conference hall. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, men and women in tailored suits. The scent of luxury perfume lingered in the air. He wore a borrowed blazer, one size too big. His shoes were scuffed, his heart louder than his steps. He walked past polished faces. Their eyes scanned him, not with curiosity, but calculation. He took a seat in the back. The lights dimmed. The speaker walked on stage. A man with quiet confidence. No diamonds, no gold, but the room bent to his presence. He smiled, then said something that pierced the silence. The difference between the rich and the poor is not money. It is mindset. The room leaned in. He leaned in. The speaker continued. A poor mindset sees risk. A rich mindset sees opportunity. A poor mindset waits for permission. A rich mindset creates paths. Each word struck like thunder. The young man felt his pulse quicken. He remembered his neighborhood, dusty streets, broken windows, men yelling about what could have been, mothers counting coins to feed 5 children, dreams locked behind rusted gates. The speaker raised a single finger. If you are always asking how much it costs, instead of how much it makes, you are thinking like the poor. He swallowed hard. The words hit home. Too hard. He remembered saying those very words. Too many times. That night, at the food stall, under the flickering bulb, he had told his friend, "I cannot afford to try." He looked around. Everyone was silent, but their eyes said everything. Some were angry. Some were shaken. He was both. The speaker smiled again, but it was not soft. It was sharp. The poor mindset protects comfort. The rich mindset destroys it. He felt a chill, not from the air conditioning, but from the realization he had spent his whole life running, not from poverty, but from discomfort, from challenge, from growth. He looked down at his hands, calloused, tired, capable. Then he looked back at the stage, and something inside him cracked, not broke, cracked, just enough for the truth to bleed in. He was not poor because he had nothing. He was poor because he believed he deserved nothing. He stood up, not fully sure why, but he knew this. He would never think the same way again. He stepped out of the conference hall, and the bright sunlight hit his face like a slap. The world outside was loud, cars honking, people rushing, vendors shouting, but inside him, there was only silence. A silence so deep, it echoed with every word the speaker had said. His footsteps on the pavement felt heavier now, not because he was tired, but because his mind was carrying something new, something dangerous. Awareness. He had walked into that hall expecting tips on success. He had walked out with his excuses shattered. He sat down on a concrete bench, the surface warm from the afternoon sun. Around him, life moved at its usual pace. Children played with empty bottles, their laughter rising above the traffic. A beggar limped across the street, waving a torn cap. Nearby, 2 men argued over a few rupees, and he sat there still, observing it all through a different lens. He realized now, poverty was not just in pockets. It was in decisions, in hesitation, in fear. His mind flashed back to last week, when his uncle had offered him a job, low pay, long hours, no room to grow. He had accepted it without thinking. Why? Because it felt safe, predictable. But now, safe felt like a prison. Predictable felt like death. He pulled out his phone, stared at it. He opened his saved notes. Business ideas he had written and forgotten. Half-baked, unpolished, all abandoned. He began to read them one by one. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from awakening. There was one idea, just one, that had kept him up at night 6 months ago. A small delivery app for local vegetable sellers. He had pitched it to two friends. They had laughed. One had said, "You are not educated enough to build that." The other had said, "Who will invest in a guy from this slum?" He had laughed with them, but he had not laughed today. Not after what he had heard. The rich mindset creates paths. Those words rang in his ears. He knew now no one was coming. No one would hand him a better future. No one would pick him up and place him in a boardroom. He would have to walk there, barefoot if necessary. He stood up from the bench. His eyes were on fire, not from dust, from purpose. He walked down the street with a new stride, shoulders straight, spine stiff, jaw clenched. Each step said one thing: enough. Enough of blaming. Enough of waiting. Enough of surviving. He passed the barber shop, where the old men always gathered to complain about the government. He did not stop. He passed the alley where teenagers wasted hours scrolling and smoking. He did not stop. He reached his home. 2 small rooms, 1 broken fan, cracked walls. His mother looked up from her sewing machine. He smiled. Not the smile of politeness, but the smile of quiet fire. He sat beside her, and for the first time, he told her everything. Not just what happened in the hall, but his dreams, his fears, his plans. She did not interrupt, only listened. And when he finished, she said nothing. She simply placed her hand on his. It was enough. That night, he could not sleep. His mind raced, not with worry, but with building blocks, strategies, calls to make, people to ask, risks to take. He drafted his pitch. He sent emails. He made a video of himself explaining the idea. He uploaded it. It got 5 views. 2 were his. But he did not stop. Because rich mindsets do not stop at silence. They fight to be heard. 1 week passed. Then 2. Nothing. But he kept building. He borrowed a friend's laptop. Learned basic coding from free courses. He went to local vegetable vendors. Asked questions. Took notes. Listened. Really listened. He redesigned the app on paper a dozen times. And then, one night, a message came. A stranger had seen his video. A small-time investor. Not a billionaire. Not a savior. But someone willing to talk. Willing to listen. They met. The investor asked hard questions. He answered every one. Not because he knew everything, but because he had lived the problem. He was the market. He was the user. He was the need. And when the meeting ended, the investor extended his hand. Not for a handshake, but for a deal. He signed it with fingers that once stitched sandals, with hands that once served tea. He walked out, not as a millionaire, but as a man no longer afraid of his own thoughts. He walked past the same bench, past the same noise, past the same doubts, but nothing looked the same, because he was not the same. That night, he stared at the ceiling, under the same broken fan, but the air felt different, because he had breathed life into a new reality. And tomorrow, he would breathe deeper. He would wake earlier. He would walk further, because his mindset was no longer chained. It was unleashed. He woke up before the sun. The sky was still dark, that deep shade of blue right before the first break of dawn. His room was silent, but his thoughts were already running. Not wild, focused. His feet touched the cool cement floor. No slippers. No hesitation. He washed his face with cold water from the metal bucket beside the sink. The chill ran down his spine like a jolt, but he welcomed it. He stared at himself in the cracked mirror. Same eyes. Same skin. But the reflection looked back with a different energy. It was no longer a question. It was a statement. He sat down on the floor with his notebook, scribbled plans and corrections, circled ideas, rewrote tasks from yesterday. His handwriting was messy, his grammar broken, but the content was sharp. Every idea was born out of experience, not imagination. He had lived what he was solving, and that made him dangerous. He left the house before his mother woke up. She had been sewing until midnight again, and he did not want to disturb her rest. He closed the door softly behind him, stepped into the morning air. The streets were still sleepy. The bakery shutters were half open. Dogs stretched lazily across the sidewalks, and a rickshaw driver snored loudly in his seat. But he was already moving. Every morning, He walked 2 kilometers to a tiny co-working space on the other side of the town. He could not afford a monthly pass yet, but the manager liked his persistence. He let him work for 3 hours every day before the official hours began. That was all he needed. 3 hours of silence. 3 hours of internet. 3 hours of focused obsession. He entered the building and nodded at the guard, who smiled and opened the gate without a word. The fluorescent lights flickered awake as he turned on the switch. He plugged in the borrowed laptop, sat down on the stiff plastic chair, and opened the prototype screen. It was rough, glitchy, unattractive, but it worked. It could take orders. It could list vendors. It could track deliveries. And today, he would test it live. He opened his contact list and called the first vendor who had agreed to try the app. An old man named Rafik. He sold vegetables from a wooden cart near the railway station. Rafik answered after the third ring. "Ready?" he asked. There was a pause. Then the old man chuckled. "Ready, beta. Let's see what your magic phone can do." He smiled. It was not magic. It was blood. It was sweat. It was sleepless nights and endless rejections. But he would let Rafik believe it was magic, if that made it easier. He launched the app, registered the cart, uploaded the inventory. Carrots, tomatoes, onions. He hit go live. Then he waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. Nothing. His heart started to pound. Had he missed something? Was the network slow? Was the server down? He refreshed the screen. Still blank. He looked at the time. 6:43 a.m. Too early. Most people were still asleep. He took a deep breath. Waited. At 6:47, a single ping echoed from the speakers. An order. Customer, Nassim Bibi. Location, 3rd block, near the masjid. Items, 2 kilos of potatoes, 1 kilo of tomatoes, coriander. He stared at the screen. Another ping. And another. Within 10 minutes, 5 orders came in. He stood up so fast, his chair tipped over. He called Rafik again. "Orders are in," he said, voice shaking. Rafik laughed. "Then I better start packing." He watched the orders appear on the screen, one by one, like raindrops falling in a desert. Every order was a scream that said, "It works." He turned around and looked at the empty co-working space. It felt like a temple. He had worshipped here for weeks with nothing but faith and stubbornness. And now, something sacred was happening. A breakthrough. Not in code. In belief. His phone rang again. This time, a vendor from another neighborhood. Word had spread. They wanted to join too. He promised to visit them by noon. He closed his laptop, packed it in a cloth bag, and stepped outside. The city had woken up now. Shops were opening. Children were brushing teeth in the street. Women were sweeping porches. But his world was different now. He was not walking the same streets. He was walking on purpose. He passed the tea stall near the bus stop. 3 boys from his old school were there, laughing about someone's failure. He used to sit there. He used to laugh too. He did not stop. He had nothing to prove. He arrived at the second vendor's stall, introduced the app, showed the features, answered questions. Some laughed. Some frowned. Some listened. And a few downloaded. He returned home at sunset. His shirt soaked in sweat. His phone at 2%. His body begging for rest. But his eyes were alive. His mother handed him a plate of food, sat next to him quietly. He took the first bite, then looked at her. "Ma," he said softly, "this will work." She did not ask what he meant. She only nodded. And for the first time, there was pride in her eyes, not the loud kind. The kind that sits deep in the chest and stays there. That night, he lay on the floor beside the open window, the ceiling fan creaking above him. He stared at the sky, dark and endless. He knew he was still at the bottom, still poor in the eyes of the world, still unknown, still vulnerable. But inside, he was rich beyond measure, because he had learned the one thing that changed everything. The richest man is not the one who owns the most. It is the one who refuses to be owned by fear. The next morning, the sky was golden with promise. Birds called to one another across wires, and the city stirred awake beneath a rising sun that painted the rooftops orange. He opened his eyes not from the alarm, but from something stronger: urgency. His bones ached, his body tired, but his spirit surged with momentum. He rose slowly, the floor cool under his bare feet, and crossed the room to where his notebook sat, pages filled with ideas, sketches, numbers, and dreams that no longer felt distant. He flipped to a blank page and wrote the date in the corner, then underlined one word in bold strokes: scale. It was time to grow. What had started with one vendor and a few orders was now becoming a movement. He walked through the door, greeting the sun as if it were an ally. Down the alley, he saw two kids carrying empty water cans and an old man repairing a bicycle chain. The city looked the same, but everything inside him had shifted. Each corner he turned, he saw potential. Each face, a future customer, a future partner, a future believer. He reached the co-working space early again. The manager greeted him with a grin and a clap on the back. "You are making noise, young man," he said. "There's talk about your little app." He nodded with a grateful smile, but kept his feet moving. There was no time for comfort. Not yet. He sat down at his usual station, pulled out the laptop, and opened the dashboard. 12 vendors had signed up overnight. 47 orders had been placed. Only 2 complaints. One about a late delivery. One about missing coriander. He noted both, then opened the messaging app and checked in with each vendor personally. They replied with voice notes, laughter, even pictures of satisfied customers holding fresh vegetables. He replied to every one of them. Connection was not a strategy. It was survival. This was not just code. It was community. By noon, he had 3 meetings lined up. One with a university student who wanted to intern, another with a grocery chain manager, and a third with a local writer who was interested in making deliveries. Each meeting felt surreal. He was still wearing the same faded jeans, still carrying his laptop in a cloth bag, still unable to afford lunch some days. But people were listening, and that was worth more than money. During the second meeting, the grocery chain manager leaned forward, frowning thoughtfully. "You are solving a real problem," he said, "but your app is too simple for scale." He had expected that. He nodded. "I know," he said calmly. "That is why I need your help." The man looked surprised. Most young entrepreneurs hid behind pride. This one opened with humility. It made him dangerous. They shook hands at the end. No promises yet, but respect had been earned. And in his world, respect opened more doors than wealth. By evening, his phone rang again. An unknown number. He answered, cautious. "Is this the boy who built the Sabziwala app?" the voice asked. He smiled. "Yes, sir." The caller introduced himself, an angel investor based in Lahore. He had seen the app through a friend on LinkedIn. He wanted to schedule a call. He wanted to learn more. He wanted to know if the boy was ready to build something bigger. His heart skipped, not from excitement, from clarity. He had been ready long before anyone believed in him. He had been ready the moment he decided to stop thinking like the poor, the moment he chose discomfort over despair. He spent the night preparing the pitch. His hands moved fast, eyes laser-focused, mind running on something greater than caffeine. Every number in the presentation was real. Every chart was drawn from pain. Every slide had the dust of his streets, the voice of his vendors, the hunger of his past. This was not a startup. This was a rebellion. The next day, he sat on a video call with the investor. His shirt was ironed, his hair combed, but his words were raw, honest. "I am not asking for charity," he said. "I am offering vision." The investor said little, just nodded, took notes, watched. When the call ended, there was no immediate answer. No confetti, no magic, just silence. And that silence was powerful, because he knew something now. He knew he could survive silence. He could survive failure. What he could not survive anymore was small thinking. That evening, he went back to the streets, talked to more vendors, tested new updates, collected feedback. The app crashed once. Then again, he stayed up late fixing it. Not because he had to, but because he refused to leave something broken. It reminded him too much of the place he came from, a place where things broke and were never fixed. He was building something different, not just for himself, but for the boy who still sells onions in the heat, for the girl who dropped out to help her mother count coins, for the father who never stopped believing that one day his son would bring something home besides exhaustion. The next week, the investor called back. He was in. Seed funding approved. A small amount to most. A fortune to someone who once doubted the price of tea. But that call was not the victory. The real victory had happened long before. The day he chose to think differently. To stop blaming. To stop hiding. To stop settling. The money would help, but it would not define him. What defined him was what he had already earned: resilience, vision, and the mindset of a builder. Now, there was only one direction: forward. He stood outside his home that night, looking at the narrow lane that had raised him. Children still played cricket with a broken bat. A woman still yelled from a balcony. A man still cursed his fate near the tea stall. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had, because for the first time, he was not waiting for change. He was the change, not just for himself, but for everyone watching quietly from the shadows, wondering if they too could escape. And the answer, as he now knew, was yes, but only if they killed the poverty in their minds before they killed the poverty in their wallets. Only if they dared to risk everything, for something no one else could see. Yet, he woke the next morning to the sound of clanging pots in the kitchen. His mother was already up, humming softly to herself, unaware that the world had just shifted beneath her son's feet. He lay there for a moment, eyes on the ceiling, the echo of last night's investor call still ringing in his ears. He had not told her yet, not because he doubted the news, but because he wanted to look into her eyes when he said it. He wanted her to see the victory before she heard the words. He got up, washed quickly, and walked to the kitchen. She turned to him with a smile, wiping her hands on her shawl. "Breakfast is ready," she said. He nodded, then sat down slowly at the table. "Ma," he said, "do you remember the app one I've been working on?" She gave him a tired smile, the kind that mothers wear when they support dreams without fully understanding them. "Yes, Beta," she said. "Of course. I got funding for it," he said. There was a pause, a silence thicker than sound. She looked at him, confused at first, then slowly, so slowly, her eyes widened. She did not jump up. She did not cry. But something in her face changed. A wrinkle in her forehead softened. Her shoulders eased, just a little, as if the burden she had carried for years had lightened by an ounce. He smiled. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. She said nothing. She did not need to. Her silence was louder than applause. He left the house with a different kind of energy. A quiet fire. The city no longer looked like a battlefield. It looked like a blueprint. Every vendor, every customer, every roadblock, they were not problems. They were pieces. Pieces of a puzzle only he had learned to see. He spent the day building. Not just code, systems, partnerships, logistics, ideas. He took the funding and did not waste a single rupee. He did not buy a new phone. He did not celebrate with expensive meals or social media posts. He hired 2 delivery boys, bought them second-hand bikes, paid their first week's wages in advance. One of them had a baby at home. The other had lost his father in the lockdown. They were not employees. They were soldiers, and he treated them like family. By the end of the week, 20 vendors were using the app. A local restaurant reached out, then a pharmacy. People were starting to notice. He received calls from journalists. They wanted interviews. He declined most of them. He was not chasing fame. He was chasing scale. Every minute spent talking about success was a minute stolen from building more of it. He stayed up late fixing bugs. The app crashed again. He worked through the night. Not frustrated. Not panicked. Just focused. Each bug was a lesson. Each error message a teacher. He welcomed them all. By Sunday, his first investor called again. "I want to introduce you to someone," the man said. "He runs a fund. They can take you to the next level." The next level. The words echoed in his mind. He had not even finished conquering this one. But he was ready. Not because he knew everything, but because he had stopped being afraid of learning. He met the new investors at a cafe near the business district. He wore his best shirt. Still the same bag. Still the same quiet eyes. He pitched again. But this time, his numbers did the talking. Users. Retention. repeat orders, unit economics. They listened. They asked hard questions. He answered with clarity, not polish. Truth. The meeting ended with a handshake. They would consider it. He walked out of the cafe into the noisy street. The noise did not bother him. It never had. He came from noise. He came from chaos. But now he walked through it like a man walking through smoke, untouched, unshaken, and fully awake. That evening, he visited the first vendor again, old Rafik. The cart was still there. Same spot. Same wooden wheels. But now, the vendor had a phone in his pocket and orders taped to the side of the cart. Customers called him by name. Children brought their mothers to see the mobile uncle. He grinned when he saw the boy approach. "Look what you have done," Rafik said, tapping the screen. "This phone buzzes more than my wife's mouth now." They both laughed. But beneath the laughter was something unspoken. A bond. A shared revolution. He sat beside the cart as the sun dipped below the rooftops. He watched people walk by. Men in slippers, women carrying baskets, children chasing tires. And he realized something. The streets would always look the same. The walls would stay chipped. The drains would still overflow in the rain. But the minds inside these streets were shifting. One by one. Quietly. Steadily. And that was the revolution. Not loud. Not bloody. But real. He went home late that night. His mother was asleep. He tiptoed into his room and opened his notebook. He flipped through the pages. So many notes. So many dreams. So many doubts scribbled and rewritten and conquered. On the last page, he wrote a new line. Not a goal. Not a quote. Just truth. Poverty is not a lack of money. It is a lack of belief. And for the first time in his life, he closed the notebook, not because he had run out of ideas, but because he had finally begun living them. The morning broke with a stillness that felt almost sacred. There was no dramatic sunrise, no sudden gust of wind, just the quiet hum of a city preparing for another ordinary day. But nothing about this day was ordinary for him. He stepped out onto the narrow veranda of his home, the chipped cement still cool under his feet. Down the alley, a cat stretched across a sunbeam. A bicycle bell rang somewhere far off, and the scent of frying oil drifted from a neighbor's kitchen. Everything was familiar, yet within him, a storm brewed, not of fear, but of direction. Focused, undeniable, irreversible. He had spent his entire life walking these streets as a dreamer. Now he was walking them as a builder. Each crack in the pavement reminded him where he came from. Each corner turned whispered where he was going. He caught a rickshaw and headed toward the new office. It was not much, just a single room in a shared building, but it was his. 4 walls and a glass door. A small desk, 2 plastic chairs, and a whiteboard stained with red marker. To him, it felt like a skyscraper. His team arrived one by one. 3 interns, a delivery rider, and a newly hired coder who still wore school shoes. None of them were polished. None of them had impressive degrees. But every single one carried fire in their eyes. They did not need orders. They needed belief. He gave it to them. Not with speeches, but with action. He sat with the coder, rewriting modules side by side. He helped the writer map out new zones for faster delivery. He gave the interns tasks that no one had ever trusted them with before. They stumbled. They hesitated. They learned. Fast. By noon, they had fixed 2 major bugs and launched a new vendor onboarding form. Simple things, perhaps, but in a world where even small progress felt like victory. This was war being won. After lunch, he received an email. The second investor had agreed. They were ready to fund the next phase. He stared at the screen for a long time. The number was more than he had made in the past 5 years combined. But that was not what moved him. What moved him was the attached message. We believe in your mind, not just your idea. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly. His chest rose and fell with a long breath. Not relief. Readiness. There was work to do. He immediately called a meeting. They gathered around the desk, standing shoulder to shoulder in the cramped room. He did not prepare a fancy pitch. No slides. No graphs. Just truth. He told them what was coming. The funding. The expansion. The pressure. The expectation. And then he said something none of them expected. "If any of you want to leave now, I will understand." They looked at him, stunned. One of the interns frowned. "Why would we leave?" He looked around the room. "I cannot promise comfort," he said. "I cannot promise easy wins. But I can promise this. What we are building is going to change lives. And the world will watch. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But one day, people will study this team. And they will ask how we did it." Silence. And then one by one, every person in the room nodded. No one left. Not that day. Not ever. The following weeks were chaos. Beautiful, brutal chaos. The platform expanded from one neighborhood to 5. New vendors signed up daily. Orders doubled. Complaints tripled. Success had come. Yes, but so had the weight of it. Servers crashed under traffic. Delivery routes got mixed. A vendor accused them of favoritism. A customer went viral for receiving tomatoes instead of apples. Social media mocked the app. Memes spread. Laughter came from places that had once ignored them. And that was the moment. The test. Because success does not kill startups. Discomfort does. He called another meeting. This one was not filled with motivation. It was filled with tension, stress, worry. But he stood in front of them, not shaken. "We are not failing," he said. "We are adjusting." And they believed him, because he had earned their belief. Together, they worked into the nights, debugging, refining, responding to every complaint with sincerity. Not because it looked good, because it was good, real, honest, human. A week later, the viral critic who posted the tomato mishap made another video, this time praising how fast the company responded. He called them the most human startup I have ever seen. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. More downloads, more attention, but most importantly, more belief. Belief in the mission, in the people behind it, in the possibility that an idea from the slums could become a model for the future. He walked past the old market one evening, watching a young vendor accept payment through the app. The vendor was no older than 16. Sweating, smiling, calculating change faster than most shopkeepers. He wanted to stop and say something, but he did not. The boy did not need a hero. He already was one. Later that night, back in the office, he stood alone in the glow of the monitors. Rain tapped gently on the windows. He opened his notebook again, flipped past the old pages, past the doubts, the dreams, the breakdowns, and on the last page, he wrote one sentence. "This is not the end. This is the beginning of the mindset revolution." He closed the notebook, and this time, he did not sleep. He planned. He built. He dreamed louder than ever, because he finally understood. The real war was not against poverty. The real war was against surrender. And he had already won, because long ago, in the silence of a broken room, he had made the most dangerous decision of all. He had refused to think poor. He stood once more before a crowd, not of investors, not of vendors, but of young dreamers, wide-eyed, restless, burning to change their fate. The hall was silent. Every breath hung heavy with hope. He looked at them, not from above, but as one of them, one who had walked barefoot through the fire and lived to tell the story. He did not speak of profits. He did not boast of downloads or funding rounds. He spoke of the night he cried alone in a room with a cracked ceiling. He spoke of the day he saw a street vendor smile because technology had given him dignity. He spoke of the moment he realized the difference between the rich and the poor was never money. It was mindset. The poor wait. The rich act. The poor blame. The rich build. The poor fear failure. The rich embrace it like a teacher. And then he looked into their eyes and said, "Do not let your surroundings become your identity. You were not born to survive. You were born to rise. Every excuse is a chain. Every decision is a key. If you cannot change the system, change your strategy. If no one opens the door for you, build your own damn door." He paused, not for effect, but for silence to breathe its truth into their hearts. Then he said the last words that would echo long after he left that stage. "You are not poor, unless you believe you are." And with that, he walked off the stage, not as a speaker, but as a living example, that the greatest revolution is the one that happens inside the mind.